If you work outside in India, then this video is for you. If you have people working outside in India, this video is for you. And if you are a photographer working outside, this video is definitely for you. The Business Standard of India had an article about a week ago, and the article quoted another article from the World Bank, and the World Bank article has a link to a report. But the article essentially talks about heat in India and about how this is affecting people. The author mentioned people like street vendors who have to close their business early, or sometimes swap duty because they are working in the sun and one person needs to sit in the shade, else they will be in trouble. Exposure to heat or overexposure to heat will have serious health impacts for you as well as for people who work for you. And India had the dubious distinction or honor of being probably the hottest country in the world this year. Summer has changed in North India. And when I was in school, or when I used to come on holiday or so, Delhi summers used to be hot and dry. And in April, May and June, we used desert coolers. We did not use air conditioners. But now, the summers have become hot and humid. And this, unfortunately, is the new normal. Unfortunately, hot, humid summers or sultry summers are going to have a bigger impact on health and productivity in the years ahead compared with hot, dry summers. So let's get into it. I'm going to talk about wet bulb, heat islands, heat domes, a little bit about Gurugram or Gurgaon, the real field, ultraviolet, infrared, and finally a summary. So bear with me, this video may take some time. So let's talk about all of these things which I spoke about: the wet bulb temperature, urban heat islands, heat domes, a small case study about Gurgaon, the real field temperature or the heat index, the UV index, infrared radiation, and then we are going to summarize it. Remember, and none of this is academic. This is all real world stuff, and all of this is going to hit you. So I've spoken about this, I'm not going to repeat myself, but it's critical to understand how all of this is going to affect your work, because each one of these effects doesn't work in isolation. They stack up on each other, and you need to make a decision of when to shoot, where to stand, and when to say, bye, I'm done. You might miss stories, but that's part of life. And if you're like me, who has a very low tolerance for heat, it makes a big difference to how you work. So let's talk about the wet bulb temperature. This is a theoretical temperature, and it's the number that decides if sweat still works. Some people, of course, dispute the validity of the wet bulb temperature, but in effect, what the wet bulb temperature does is it is the equivalent calculated temperature assuming 100% humidity. So it captures evaporative cooling. Why is this important? Because our body cools itself by the evaporation of sweat, and at 100% humidity, the evaporation slows down. What happens now is something which you need to think about, because if the wet bulb temperature, which is 27 degrees Celsius, which means if the equivalent temperature at 100% humidity is 27, your body will still cool because your internal body temperature typically is about 35 to 36 degrees Celsius. So there is a temperature gradient from your body to the external air, so you will cool down slightly. But when the wet bulb temperature reaches a much higher level, like 32 degrees, you start to enter the danger zone. So a humid 38 degrees Celsius can be more dangerous than a dry 42 degrees Celsius. Sherwood and Huber proposed a wet bulb temperature of 35 degrees Celsius as the threshold for survivability. So this is, as I said, the theoretical edge of human adaptability. And what this essentially means is that at a wet bulb temperature of 35 degrees Celsius, which means the equivalent of 35 degrees Celsius at 100% humidity, your sweat won't evaporate, your body won't cool down, and your body will start to cook itself and you will start to die. That unfortunately is true. So there have been tests much done, and Penn State, the HEAT project, tested the threshold directly on young healthy adults. In hot, dry conditions, real limits were 10 degrees lower than 35 degrees, and in humid conditions, limits were closer to 35 degrees. So the reality is much worse than what it seems to be like. So remember, you do have apps which you can download to calculate the wet bulb temperature. The wet bulb temperature did touch 35 degrees Celsius this year, and I had gone off in the evening to photograph the goat market at Jama Masjid. I asked myself if I was crazy, but luckily it was 35 degrees Celsius only for about an hour or so. So I survived. I don't know so much about the people, but the people did tell me that their goats were often dying due to the heat. So that is a problem. And like I mentioned earlier, relative humidity has increased by 10% across North India over the last decade. And again, to repeat what I said, traditionally dry heat cities like Delhi, Kanpur, Jaipur, Banaras now trend humid, and that's what I have experienced. It is absolutely horrible because you feel as if you're suffocating, and it's something which you need to think about. People have predicted that North India will be unlivable by the turn of the century. I am a bit more pessimistic. I believe that North India might be unlivable by the middle of the century. So don't trust the headline temperature alone on a humid or monsoon fringe days. And if sweat sits on your skin without evaporating, the heat load is climbing fast. I know this because my body tells me when I feel as if there is a deep or a great amount of pressure building up inside me. I've also found that not just the pre-monsoon, but even the phase when the monsoon has ended, or even between rains in North India, you actually tend to suffer. And this year, because of the El Nino effect, I do feel the rise of the wet bulb temperatures in between the rains. Now let's move on to a concept called urban heat islands, and I actually feel a bit sad that many people who claim to be, let's say, environmentally conscious have absolutely no clue about the concept of an urban heat island. I lived in Gurgaon, and I'll talk about Gurgaon again later, so let me not talk about this. But cities are hotter than the surrounding countryside. The surrounding countryside gets much more rain than cities do. Why is that? Because we have been building buildings, building roads, and we have been increasing the number of vehicles on the street. We've been increasing the number of industries. The number of air conditioning units have increased. Now, vehicles, AC units, and industry emit waste heat directly into the air. Concrete and asphalt absorb and re-radiate solar heat during the day. That is a property of concrete and asphalt. Lost vegetation removes the natural cooling of evapotranspiration, as they call it. And number two, the more buildings you build, you actually trap air. When there is no air circulation, you cannot cool down and the city tends to heat up. So this heat actually stays within the city. It stays on the ground and it gets trapped in the roads, it gets trapped in the buildings. And what happens at night is that the city hardly cools. And again, if you've experienced this, Delhi now, the minimum temperature is often over 30 degrees Celsius, which was never the case about 20 to 30 years ago. Unfortunately, in our current world, very few people think about this. That is a problem. So the heat island effect actually adds to a heat wave baseline. It does not replace a heat wave baseline, it adds. Now, there are micro heat islands, which means that it's not as if Delhi or any city is one uniform heat island, but heat varies block to block. So if you have an area which is more densely built up than the other parts of the city, those will become micro heat islands. Number two, when you chop off the trees in a market or you have open parking lots, they can run several degrees hotter. And think about the people who have to manage your parking. I have seen these people, I talk with these people, and I see the heat stress on their faces. As we are cutting down trees, it gets more and more difficult to find a parking spot under the tree. And you will often find people driving around looking for a space under a tree. But the same people, when they get back into their offices, will recommend that we cut trees so that we can build buildings. So, again, construction sites, markets, parking areas are often the hottest micro zones. And unfortunately, especially when you talk about construction sites, that's where laborers work the most, and often photographers also spend a lot of time. So the official city temperature consistently understates real on-site exposure, and we don't have measurements for the on-site temperature in any location. And probably one reason why any builder will not do it, apart from the fact that they're not aware, is that they don't want to alert their workers. Now we talk about heat domes, which is another additive effect. A heat dome is a unique phenomenon, and it's a bit difficult to explain, but a heat dome is a high pressure system that traps warm air over a region. So what happens is, now hot air or warm air typically is lighter than colder air. So hot air should rise and should, give us some sort of relief. But when you have a high pressure system over the city or over a region, that then it blocks the rising of the hot air, it blocks the incoming weather or the cooler air, and it seems as if you're in a pressure cooker. And that is the simplest way that I can explain a heat dome. What happens is that you normally have a jet stream that goes from west to east around the globe, and when these jet streams slow down due to various factors, when it develops large slow loops, then these high pressure systems can become blocked in place. And they can last for days, weeks, and in extreme cases longer. People have postulated that the heat wave or the persistent heat wave in Europe this year is due to a heat dome. What's worse is another phenomenon called an omega blocker. An omega block, and again you have a jet stream, the jet system here, and here you have the high pressure zone, which is building down or pushing air down onto you. And then you have a low pressure zone. So this sort of structure looks like the Greek alphabet omega. So here you have this high pressure pushing the hot air down onto you. And again, this adds to the heat island effect. Remember that it does not replace a heat island effect, it adds to the heat island. So again, high pressure forces air downwards, compression generates heat like a pump, and this is something which again you might find when you actually pump the tires of your bicycle. You might feel that the tire becomes hotter. If you've studied physics, you will know this to be true. So the air arrives at the surface hotter than when it started. So imagine now you've got this pressure pushing down. This high pressure zone is pushing, and the pressure is actually generating heat, and this hot air is being pushed down towards you. Again, there is a feedback loop, and you have very clear skies, maximum solar radiation. That's going to amplify the effect of a heat dome. Dry ground again can create heating, and given the fact that in Delhi we are unfortunately water deficit, the probability of a heat dome actually increases. Now Delhi apparently was under the dome, as you might call it, in 2022 and 2024. And if you remember 2024, that was when we had the national elections, and I know that in several polling stations people died because of the heat. So we have experienced heat domes in Delhi. I also remember that when I returned to North India in 2013, there was a time when the temperature was above 47 degrees Celsius for close to 20 days in June, I think, of 2014. So while the record talks about 2022 and 2024, I definitely believe that we had a problem in 2013 or 14. So that's something which again we will have to take into account as we progress in life, because heat domes, heat island effect are going to affect us. What does it mean for you as a photographer or as an outdoor worker? The days-long heat accumulation, no overnight recovery, means that you're going into a pressure cooker. Then when you're going into a pressure cooker, don't forget, these are going to cumulatively affect your cardiac health. Do not believe that only cold weather can cause a myocardial infarction or a heart attack. Extreme heat can also cause a heart attack. So now you have the heat dome, the worst wet bulb, and the heat island, sometimes all coming together, and when they all come together, you will not have fun. Now let's talk about Gurgaon. I lived in Gurgaon in 1993, and then I left North India for about 20 years, and I returned in 2013. When I lived here in 1993, the forest surrounded us, and Gurgaon was about 1 degree or 2 degrees cooler than Delhi. We got considerably more rain than Delhi. But when I returned in 2013, first of all, I couldn't recognize the city. It took me almost a year to figure out the roads and the landmarks because it was all concrete. And the forested land had depleted. So, in fact, Gurgaon has experienced the most rapid deforestation or degreening that I know of. And I experience now that because I go to Delhi twice a week, Delhi gets considerably more rain than Gurgaon, and Delhi is a bit cooler than Gurgaon. So we have been pushing the Aravali's back. And in fact, even since I returned in 2013, I have seen that the Aravali's have been retreating. Unfortunately, I have not started doing what I had planned to do, which was to photograph the Aravali's before they completely disappear. It's something which I will have to do, and the need to photograph the Aravali's is now becoming urgent. On top of all of this, we have a lot of encroachment, a lot of illegal construction. We have been dumping construction waste into the natural waterways of the Aravali forest, and when that happens, water then floods, the rainwater floods the cities, and that happens in Gurgaon. So anyone who knows anything about science will know that greenery cools the environment. When you cut the forest, when you cut away the trees, when you remove the grass, you are actually increasing the impact of the world's natural heating system. Greenery and the forest provide one of nature's cooling mechanisms, and when we take that away, we are just eating into the futures of our children and grandchildren. So what happened in Gurgaon? All the shade canopy has gone. The soil moisture, natural humidity buffering, all gone. We've built pavements and glass facades, heat reflecting hard surfaces. And so the heat island effect is going to, increase. Where I live, when I returned to Gurgaon and I moved into my current condominium, we were the only condominium on the road. And it was fantastic, peaceful. Steadily, they've built 2 more condominiums. They built about 300 single-story flats, and they have just opened up a mall right opposite our front gate. The traffic has increased and it's going to get worse. What that means is that we are going to live in a micro heat island. And I know people are very excited about the mall, and everyone's dancing and singing and saying, oh, we have a mall opposite, we can go and get ice cream. What they don't realize is that our road is going to become hotter in the years ahead. So what does Gurgaon actually reveal? It reveals, or it gives you a preview of where other cities in India are heading. As we are destroying our environment, and apparently we are 176 we are ranked 176 out of 177 from an global environmental ranking perspective. I don't see us making very intelligent decisions in the future or for the future, and neither do I anticipate our descendants being very thankful to us. The real field temperature is another absolutely critical temperature. What happens very simply is that the official temperature just measures the temperature in a shaded, ventilated, standard enclosure. Therefore, it is actually false. It excludes humidity, wind, and the direct sun. It describes, as the slide says, a box but not a body. So the apparent or the fields-like temperature falls humidity, wind, and sun back. And this models what you actually experience and is closer to a real on-location risk. Therefore, when you are looking at the weather forecast on your app, whether it's AccuWeather or whether it is from weather.com, always click the More button or the More arrow and have a look at what the real field looks like. Now, the real field, there are 2 parts to this. Of course, has the humidity, the wind, the cloud, and the direct solar intensity and what you feel in the sun. The real feel in the shade has the same formula with the sun component removed. So the most weather apps or weather forecast apps will tell you what the real feel is and what the real feel in the shade is. And you will be surprised as to the difference between the two. So the real feel, to some extent, mirrors the same evaporation physics behind the wet bulb temperature, and unfortunately it does not move up smoothly, it jumps sharply. And there's often a big difference between the temperature that is recorded and reported and the real field temperature, which is often not reported. So I don't know how many of you have experienced the Loo, which is the hot, dry wind of North India's April to June. And the Loo is actually dangerous because it is air that is hotter than the skin. And I've experienced this in Benares and in parts of the East Uttar Pradesh, where it dehydrates you. And when that happens, or when you are, as we say, hit by the Loo, you need to drink lots of water, up to about 5 liters or 6 liters of water. If not, you're going to actually collapse. So now what happens here? You have heat due to radiation, heat due to conduction, and heat due to convection. Convection is heat or the heat transfer due to moving air. So when you have the Loo, an extreme dry heat, the moving air actually adds convective heat faster than still air. So when the air is still and you're standing in the sun, what you get is the effect of radiation and conduction. When you have the Loo, which is hotter than your skin, the effect is to add another few degrees Celsius because you have the convection heat due to the movement of the air. So then you have, in the Loo, you have conduction, radiation and convection. When the air still is just radiation and conduction. So again, the pre-monsoon and monsoon humidity spikes. Unfortunately, while the slide doesn't have it, you also have to look at the post-monsoon humidity. And we often underestimate the impact of this humid heat, because this humid heat is actually very dangerous. And I remember when I was in Bombay, in that 1 week before the monsoon, all of us would feel absolutely miserable. And when the monsoon would start, despite the floods, we'd feel a sense of relief. It's almost like a release from the pressure cooker. So now let's talk about the ultraviolet index. So again, in your weather app, you're going to have a category which talks about the UV index, and the index typically goes from 0 to 11 plus. The categories are low, moderate, high, very high and extreme. Indian summers, North Indian summers, are routinely very high and extreme. So now you have 3 kinds of ultraviolet rays: UVA, UVB and UVC. UVA has the longest wavelength. It penetrates the skin and is consistent all day, all season. UVB, shorter wavelength, and it drives sunburn and peaks sharply near solar noon. So that's why you should not be out around noontime. And UVC has the shortest and most energetic. It's not a ground level concern. So remember, it's not what the UV in the air, it's the UV at the ground level that is critical. So the 2 that we are normally concerned with are UVA and UVB. So what happens? You can read this if you want to. Cumulative UV exposure is linked to basal cell, squamous cell, and melanoma skin cancer. So yes, you will get cancer. In South Asia, and when I was in the pharmaceutical world for 2 years, I noticed that we often don't report or diagnose illnesses in South Asia. It's one of the problems we have. The risk again is cumulative, so the more you are exposed to it, the worse it's going to become. One adds to the other, and it's not just one burn. So, melanin, which is what causes, at least us in India, to have brown skin, only offers partial protection. So don't believe that because you got brown skin, you are going to be protected. And darker skins are not immune to UV damage or skin cancer. I personally detest all these, what do you call those things, those sun-blocking creams, because they make me feel as if I'm not going to sweat. But they are possibly essential. But what you can do is wear a light, long-sleeved UV and the eyes. I actually had not considered this until I was talking with an ophthalmologist, and he told me about how cumulative UV can actually affect and degrade your eyes. It can cause cataracts and photokeratitis and, well, I can't pronounce the pterygium. But therefore, when you're buying your sunglasses, it is absolutely critical that you buy sunglasses which have a good UV index and good UV protection. So first of all, you have to look for the UV 400 label. It's good to get photochromatic lenses, and wraparound styles are critical because they protect your eyes from the reflected and peripheral light. When I used to see images of these sport people wearing these wraparound glasses, I used to think it was just a fashion statement. But now I realize that because a lot of sports people are playing outdoors, they need to block their eyes and protect their eyes from reflected light. So I intend to go to Spiti next year, and I intend to invest in a pair of wraparound glasses, because up in the hills, places like Spiti, the UV exposure is going to be much higher than it is down here in Delhi. So again, you have these the safe UV limits, SED and MED, which is something which you must consider again, because if you don't actually know what your safe limits are, you can actually run into a very, very high level of risk. So again, consider this: photobiomodulation, vitamin D synthesis. Don't believe that if you're out in the sun right through the day, your body's going to generate vitamin D. That doesn't happen at all. You need a bit of UV light. That is absolutely critical. But how much do you need? And that's something which you must think about. UV and heat stress affect animal welfare and health. I did mention that the people selling the goats at Jama Masjid told me that their goats were dying because of the heat. When I was in Coorg, they told me that now, because of the changing climate patterns and the warming of even places like Coorg, they are finding that the coffee beans are falling, and they should not be falling. So it's not just as if all of this affects us, it affects animals, it affects plants. And now we talk about infrared radiation. Now, infrared radiation is the wavelength which is longer than red. So that's something which again is critical. And my home office is directly exposed to the sun. So it is the hottest room in the house, unfortunately. About half of the ground level solar energy that arrives on the earth is infrared, which is this part here. Visible light is about 43%, and 7% is ultraviolet, but the ultraviolet light can do a lot of harm. Now, small amounts of infrared light, infrared wavelengths are important. They will help to keep you warm. especially in winter. You need the infrared light, but again, or infrared rays, but again, how much? Apparently, Paracelsus said it is the dose that determines the poison. So, you will also need to track the infrared light, in a sense, or the infrared index on your app. So, an overcast sky can also deliver a significant heat load even when the UV index reads low. So remember, infrared wavelength penetrates haze and skin and thin cloud cover much more than UV does. So the longer wavelengths actually behave differently compared to the shorter wavelengths. Ultraviolet waves are shorter and they get blocked by thin cloud cover, but infrared actually penetrates. So when you now combine ultraviolet and infrared exposure, especially when the sky is clear, they will amplify skin damage much more than either alone. So one tends to add to the other, and oxidative stress will increase or accelerate your aging. Oxidation is the addition of oxygen or increase in valency. But then you also have something called a free radicals. When you have an increase in oxidative stress, the number of free radicals increases in your body, and when that happens, then you end up in deeper trouble, increasing the risk of cancer, skin cancer and stuff like that. So you need to treat ultraviolet and infrared indexes as one combined exposure, not two separate hazards. SPF ratings only measure UV protection, so it does not protect you against infrared. So just remember that. So what do you need to do? Wear a hat. Escape into the shade. Maybe wear a thin, arm cover or a long sleeve shirt even in the summer. So remember, now air temperature, humidity, ultraviolet, infrared and wind don't act alone, they all act together. The real outdoor risk is a combination of all of these factors, and you need to have a deep dive or take a deep dive into your weather forecast or your weather app to understand what your body is actually facing. The 5 things which you need to check: official air temperature, the real field versus real field shade gap, the UV index, the wet bulb or the humidity reading, the wind speed and direction, which gives you an indication of the loo. The safe windows are roughly before 9, and this is the time also when your body generates vitamin D. Again, after 5 to 6 p.m. the low angle of the light before 9 a.m. and after 5 p.m. actually reduce the impact of UV and infrared. Shade is absolutely critical, so wherever you are, you have to keep taking breaks in the shade. Absolutely critical. You cannot just walk around in the sun thinking that you're some sort of a hero. As my friend said, if you think you're a hero, you'll soon become zero. Yeah, that's a pretty bad joke, but what to do? April, June, terrible. We used to have heat, dry heat, but not now. And June, July is terrible. I would also actually advise caution in post-monsoon, which is September. End August and September in North India, be absolutely cautious. I remember that when I was in Bombay again, the monsoon would end around the end of September, and October would be the worst month of the year. Winter tends to be the best season, but in North India or Delhi, we have high levels of pollution now, so you're in trouble anyway. Again, not just the photographer has some sort of, let's say, freedom to choose unless you're a documentary photographer. So you must always run the 5-number check, default to the 2 safe windows, take shade breaks, absolutely critical, and wear UV 400 or photochromatic eye wear every single time. Protect your eyes. That's critical. Now, if you are a worker or gig worker or a delivery boy, you don't have any choice. But at least you can make sure that you are properly hydrated. Ensure that you have a cap and that you cover your face. I see many people actually wrapping cloths around their faces. Do that. Absolutely critical, because you will protect yourself from the dust as well. And don't forget, North India is dusty. So I'll leave this slide for you to read. My suggestion is that you pause the video at this point and read this slide. Don't just zip past it. Read it, digest it, really take the advice that I've given you. So, 5 numbers, 2 windows, 1 habit of seeking. I do hope you've enjoyed this video. I do hope you've learned something, and I do hope that you come back to watching it again, and maybe a couple of times. Share the video with people. It can help them and it might help you. So see you next time, and if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. Please leave a comment and subscribe to my channel. See you next time. Rajiv Chopra from the Dusty Lens Chronicles saying goodbye for now. Ciao. See you in the next video.